Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hump Day Hiatus, where you get to take a nice little pause from diet culture, from body shaming, all that BS that's out there that makes us feel, less than enough when it comes to our bodies. I am here tonight with the wonderful Fiona Sutherland, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. And Fiona and I are wonderful friends and colleagues. We've known each other for 3 years now, maybe?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And we're going to be chatting a little about body positivity, about this month's body trust core element, which is all about, turning towards yourself with kindness and curiosity, and wherever else the conversation goes tonight. So, Fiona, I'll just share a little bit about you and then you can fill in any gaps and we'll get started.
Sure.
So, Fiona is a dietitian, and she also works with a few key mindfulness practices, I think rooted in John Kabat-Zinn's work.
Yep.
And also is a yoga teacher. And her work is really rooted in health at every size, which is also known as HAES, and the non-diet approach to eating. So welcome, Fee.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here. And, you and I could just talk and talk and talk for hours and hours. So it'll be so great to just dive on into some really great topics today.
Yeah. So how about if we start off with you sharing a little bit about your work with us and why you're passionate about it?
Sure. Okay. So, as you said, my background, or my base career is as a dietitian. And I certainly didn't come into, areas of body image and eating disorders and, diet culture interrupting, I suppose, naturally, in the sense that I was a little bit of an accidental. I stumbled across this way of working completely accidentally, actually. I really trained with more community kind of nutrition in mind, and I'm a qualified sports dietitian as well. So I didn't really have eating disorders on my radar at all, and not having had a lived experience myself. However, living in diet culture, how can you not be somehow influenced by all of the tentacles that are thrown out to us each and every day? So yeah, it was really through my work in more clinical eating disorders that I began to really develop an insight into the way people were relating to their bodies and relating to food, and the way in which diet culture messages were really interrupting our abilities to tune in and listen to ourselves and honor the wisdom that our body has innately. And I became really, really interested, in, I guess, the psychology of it. And interestingly enough, my science degree, which is my first degree, I majored in psychology. So I think I've always had an interest in behavior and how that relates to our experiences and our belief patterns, and how the whole thing kind of fits together. So it was only probably shortly before I met you, Dana, that I did my yoga teacher qualification, and it's just really broadened my understanding of how we can come back to our bodies, using specific strategies and skills and tools, and coming from that place of kindness. And so it really kind of crosses over the food and eating and body image work, and so much of how we can help ourselves heal and live most well in the world.
Yeah, totally. I know myself too. I definitely, um, the yoga training for me as well was also kind of like another layer of really looking at my relationship with my body,
Mm-hmm.
um, and how it felt to be in my body.
Yep. Exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. It just gives us this different experience, where we're so used to looking from the outside in,
Mhm.
and not only us looking from the outside in, but then also watching other people watch us as well, which is still looking from the outside. Yoga really helps us to develop what's called interoception, that sense of that that felt sense of being in the body and in connection with the body, which is just so valuable to us, especially in times of struggle. When things are going okay for us, interoception is there for us. And when things are not going okay for us, our human tendency is to kind of turn away from ourselves and start to rely more on external messages. And that's why and our health systems doesn't help that. It's like, here, take this, do that, and which draws us away from our body's wisdom. And of course, sometimes we need help from the outside. Of course,
Yeah, absolutely.
that's real life. But when we turn away from ourselves and abandon our own wisdom, that's when we can get ourselves into a bit of a pickle.
Yeah, and even in those moments and circumstances when we do need that external help and assistance, we can still be with that in
Yes.
ways that bring our interoception along, right? That bring our
Yep.
own wisdom and our own lived experience along with what is coming in from the external world as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's taking kind of the external wisdom, and skills and knowledge and what we know about ourselves, and what we know about the world and the cultures in which we live. And then there's the internal wisdom as well, which draws on that really much more deep and wise and all-knowing part of us, which, when we are able to tune into that whilst also taking into account some sources of external wisdom, we find this space where we can be in contact with our own experience without judging, without critiquing, without kind of collapsing in on our own experience, but remaining kind of open-hearted and open-minded. And as I said before, this is most important when we're struggling. When things are good,
Yeah.
we're kind of like, oh yeah, that's nice, that's good. But it's when we're struggling that this becomes a real challenge. It's a common human challenge, really, to be able to stay in contact with that sense of us that really has our own back and says, I've got you, it's okay.
Yeah, totally. When I first kind of started doing some of this work, I thought of it in a way of kind of living from the body up,
Yes.
or like a body centric way of living, so that I take that information and that wisdom that's coming from that place, and then I use what I know of the world and myself in my mind, right, to help me to figure out, okay, what's going to be the best option here, what's going to be the most supportive. So it's that intellectual piece, but those options are there, but ultimately what I choose is being guided by that wisdom that I've gained from the interoception process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think about it like you said something just before, which was so poignant and important, and that is, we're kind of coming from the bottom up, when so much of our lives have been what we would call top down. So that very intellectualized kind of thinking your way through process and thinking and analyzing, and that's where a lot of food rules come from, is the kind of the intellectualizing and the analyzing. And what happens then is we tend to get stuck because we're getting this kind of fixing mentality where if I only knew more, if I only understood more, if I only could do this more, and that's very kind of what I would call neck up, or upper
Yeah.
level kind of cognition. Whereas what you were saying is this is not only the bottom up and using the body's wisdom, but also the integration or the
Yeah.
communication between the more intellectual and the cognitive, and then the wisdom of the body. So I think the kind of the magic or the real um, connectedness is in the integration, in the
Mhm.
communication between top down and bottom up, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And figuring out, what that balance looks like for you, and also,
Right.
knowing that it's going to change from moment to moment, day to day, situation to situation, but, you know, kind of getting a gauge on, what feels the most supportive in terms of that relationship and that balance. I remember, I think it was in my body trust training where I heard this quote, and I have no clue who said it or where it came from. Um, but it went something like, the mind is a dangerous place. You don't ever want to get caught up there alone.
Yeah, right.
And I
Right.
found, in talking about kindness and curiosity and these sorts of things this month, I've been thinking about this again because, you know, it it's the mind where the unkind thoughts come from, right?
Hmm.
And those rules that you were talking about that really don't allow us to explore and be curious because,
Hmm.
everything's organized in neat and tidy boxes, and
Hmm.
this is the way it's supposed to go, so this is what is going to happen.
Hmm.
It doesn't leave any room for, yeah, but what if I'm feeling like this today and I don't want to do that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? And
Yep.
instead of trusting our body's wisdom and going with that, we go with our mind and
Hmm.
put more rules on and the shoulds and say, well, it doesn't matter that you're feeling that way today. You should be doing this anyway.
Hmm.
And so completely overriding all of those cues and signals and all of that information from the
Hmm.
body and really just devaluing it, right? Like not allowing it to be as present or communicate with and integrate with all of that information from the mind.
Yeah, I love the way you explained that. And I think when what that was really reminding me is that if we were to for those who are listening and watching who are quite kind of visual or creative or imaginative, one thing we can kind of play around with is the idea of being in relationship with our body and seeing that as an actual relationship. So we're not just two entities, as in a mind and a body. We're so much more than that. But
Mm-hmm.
if we were to kind of just bring it back down to simplistic, just for the sake of this particular conversation or conversations moving forward, the way that we speak to our body really matters. The way that we are with our body. And if you think about it, many humans have had the experience maybe of feeling ignored or feeling excluded or feeling talked over or feeling dominated by. And I don't know what other people think, but when that has happened to me, it feels awful. It feels really horrible. It's a very diminishing experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be fair to say that that's how our body feels too. It feels diminished. It feels not worth listening to. It kind of starts silencing itself. It starts shutting down all those vital feedback signals that we need, that are so valuable to us. Things like, gut function. We start to, I hear people use the word. I personally don't love this word, but I hear people talking about their, sluggish guts and things like that. And I think to myself, wow, that's a gut that has been silenced. Actually, like that's a gut
Right.
that has not been listened to, that hasn't been honored. And yes, there might be some stuff going on. Absolutely. I'm not saying, it's psychosomatic or whatever, but there's something there that's, or talking about all kinds of different symptoms that our bodies actually start to become a bit desperate to tell us what it needs. And then, if we think about our own situations where we've asked and asked and told and really insisted and wanted to be listened to, and we haven't been heard, it's a very silencing, diminishing experience. So one way that I like to think about, moving forward and healing that relationship is, you know, how can I tune in a little more to my body's signals? How can I honor what my body is trying to tell me? And sometimes our bodies tell us, sometimes our bodies give us signals in ways that are not pleasant, or are not don't feel good. Um, and sometimes we don't like that. So we turn away from it, saying, well, if you're not going to give me signals that I want to hear, then I'm not going to listen. And unfortunately, that's kind of doesn't work that way. Our bodies are going to give us some pleasant signals and some unpleasant signals. And it's just doing its best. Like it's doing its best to stay with you, to stay present, to stay
Yeah.
relevant. and it really is asking, most of the time asking in quite a polite fashion, really, um, just to be heard and just to be listened to. So our job really, and this takes a lot of courage, is to kind of step forward and say, I am willing to listen. I'm willing to stay in contact with, I am willing to honor. And that, to be honest, is very scary, and it can take a great deal of courage, particularly when we've just tuned out and turned our body's volume right down.
Yeah, I know. Well, you've described, pieces of my experience to a
Mm.
T in that example. In that we do a lot of things to silence our body, right? Because we don't, whether it's deliberate or whether it's intentional or not, um, a lot of times we don't want to hear what it has to say, even from the simplest cue as having to go to the bathroom.
Right.
Right? If we're busy in our day, it's an inconvenient thing that, okay, I gotta go to the bathroom. And so from the very simplest things, I find that my mind just wants to override. It wants to overpower and, get to the tasks and all these things and be in a hurry. And our body is, at least my body, I can't speak for anyone else's, but my body is continually telling me to slow down
Right.
and breathe
Right.
and, right, take things
Mm.
in and be with my senses and the moment. And then, the neck up part of me is kind of going, no, but we don't have time for that, we got to go, we got all these
We
things.
don't have time for that. We don't have time for this shit. Not breathing. What the hell?
And so I'm curious, as my brain's going, I'm trying to think, like, what did I do to start kind of stepping into that courage and making this shift.
Mm.
And I right now at the moment, I can't really think of anything that helped me make that transition. So I'm curious if
Mm.
there's anything that you would suggest that can help folks possibly start to kind of make that transition in a world, like, let's be face it, that really puts a lot of demands on us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I would say the first thing I want to speak to there is really this myth of rock bottom. It's the biggest bunch of shit I've ever heard in my life, that we have to somehow reach our own rock bottom to start to reconnect with ourselves. And I think that is it's such a harmful narrative.
Mhm.
And really, wherever we are, that's where we are, as somebody very wise said, probably Buddha or somebody like that. Wherever you are, there you are, type thing.
Yeah.
And that, I think having a desire and a wish for your own well-being is a really great place to start. And that's what self-compassion is, really. When we have a willingness to turn towards ourselves with kindness and open-heartedness rather than criticism, and harshness, which, that is the essence of self-compassion. And really what we're talking about here is asking ourselves, am I willing to try something different? It might feel really weird and kind of a bit foreign to speak to myself in a more gentle fashion, to just to pick up on the rules or the ways in which I tend to default back to those dichotomies. Am I willing? That's the first question I would say is, do I wish well for myself? We may not wish the same amount of well for ourselves as we do others,
Mhm.
but it's a starting place. If it's like, well, do I want to live more fully in my life in this world? Do I want to experience life in a different way?
Right.
If that answer is even vaguely along the spectrum of yes, even if it's not a strong yes, even if it's just a little tiny whispering yes,
Mhm.
then the second question is, am I willing? Am I willing to lean into the discomfort that will arise when I start to attune a little more into what my body is asking for in any one moment? And that might be rest, it might be socializing, it might be nourishment, it might be, like you say, going to the bathroom, because as much as we use that as like a basic biological tool, a lot of people delay going to the bathroom to the detriment
Mm. Oh
of their
yeah.
gut, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so am I willing to prioritize feeding myself regularly from a place of care? And that doesn't mean some bullshit clean eating stuff. What that means is just eating edible objects at a regular interval. That's what I say to people. That's what eating regularly is. It's just eating something edible at a regular
Yeah.
interval in a way that develops a sense of regularity, stability, calm, trust, that your body is going to be like, oh, it's okay, I can eat this now because another meal or another snack is coming along soon. So I don't need to panic. I can just completely chill out and just get on with life and do cool stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so I think starting with those two questions, it's like, do I want to get more out of life? And am I willing? That would be the starting point.
Nice. I love that. Super tangible and yeah, straightforward.
Yeah, I'm all about practical. I'm
Yeah.
all about what can I
Me
access right
too.
now.
I know.
I love like esoteric existential conversations where we, talk about the wonders of life and yada yada. I love that, but I also just love kind of getting in there and just saying, okay, step one, that
Yeah,
X, step
absolutely.
two, you know. So, and
A
that's where
hun-
we can use our minds a little bit more.
Yeah, and Renee's totally agreeing and saying that, a willingness to make a shift is critical. And sometimes it takes a long fucking time for us to get to that place of willingness.
God, yeah,
Like
definitely,
it can be years
definitely.
of
Hmm.
kind of putting a toe in and seeing what it's like and saying, oh, am I ready, am I not, like there's been decisions
Seriously.
that or changes that I've wanted for my life and have said flat out to myself, not now. It's not happening, I'm not ready.
That's exactly right. That's
And
exactly
that's
right. And
okay.
willing in this moment doesn't mean I'm not willing in the next moment. And just because I am willing right now doesn't mean I'm going to have to repeat this again 50 times over the next week. Like, willingness is something that we can come back to again and again and again and again and again and again, because, and it's okay to change our minds because our capacities change from day to day. Some days we are going to be completely up against it and have no energy, apart from to make, if we're employed, to rock up to work and clean our teeth, and
Yeah.
that's it. It's,
Yeah.
am I willing to have a difficult conversation with my colleague today? No, because I just need to stay upright, actually. So I think I think that in and of itself is an honoring of our own capacities, and it's a turning in towards ourselves rather than getting all overwhelmed with, I mean, using that example, getting all overwhelmed with shit. I need to, have this conversation and I'm so exhausted. I just don't have the brain space, but I have to do it. And then pushing through it. And then it, like, whether it goes well or not, a
Right.
bit beside the point. But, um, honoring our own capacities is so much about setting boundaries where we can say yes when we mean yes, and we can say no when we mean no. And we can put our whole heart and soul behind that, knowing that that is what is what meets my needs best in this moment. And I can change my mind in the next moment. And I can change my mind in the next moment.
Yeah,
And that's okay.
exactly. Exactly. And visiting the moments with flexibility, and instead of like and as you were using the example, is like, if we go and we move forward with this conversation even though we don't want to, right? And we push ourselves, who knows where it goes or what could happen. And then the
Right.
other piece of that too is, if we do decide because we don't have the capacity, there's still two options. Is we can either A, say to ourselves, that's okay, we don't have the capacity today, that's totally fine, and have that self-compassion and that kindness, and maybe be curious about why we don't have the capacity if we feel the need
Mm-hmm.
to,
Mm-hmm.
or the other way that it can go is we can totally shame and blame and beat the shit out of ourselves for not doing the thing that we had intended to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yep.
so I
You're
find
absolutely right.
a lot of times, we go to that place of scrutinizing ourselves when, the messages that we were receiving from our body was like, yeah, it's just not the time. Can't do this right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Yeah. And
So,
like you said, when we live in a world and a culture which has demands, all kinds of different demands on us, the example that we're kind of sticking with now, when we honor our needs and we turn towards ourselves with kindness, that can be met with resistance from others.
oh,
So it,
totally. Thank you for bringing
you
that
know,
up.
so I think that that's really fair as well. It's like, am I willing to do this even if other people are not happy with it?
Yeah,
Because I think that is the greatest risk for us, is that we continue to perform for others at the detriment of ourselves.
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, as we were mentioning before, we so much of what we do is from the outside in,
Mm-hmm.
and watching other people watching us,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't draw those lines or those boundaries. And I know when I first started to do that for myself, um, I even had conversations with myself, which happen quite frequently. um, like having the conversation with myself of like, well, okay, you're being self-compassionate and that's great and all, but are you really just copping out? Like, are you just making
Right.
decisions?
Right.
Lazy?
Yeah, that old
Yeah.
chestnut. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. So that like critical piece, that mind critic, um, still so loud as well. And one of the things that I've noticed in my practice with all of this is that as I was able to work more with that critic that I have in my mind and offer it more self-compassion, then I started to honor my body more, listen more, and give way fewer shits about
Yes.
people watching me.
Pleasing others. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting how the self-compassion, and as Kristen Neff talks about it so beautifully in her work, how self-compassion fosters self-worth, right? How
Absolutely.
for me that was part of my lived experience, and it just has changed so many facets of my life in ways that I just never even imagined, and all sometimes just saying, okay, shut up, like that's a mean thing, you're not don't talk to me like that, and then sometimes just saying like, it's okay, I know it's hard, it's okay, and sometimes that's all I've got, right, is it's okay, it's gonna be okay. And even just months with that practice made so many shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. It's like you say, it's a practice though, isn't it? It is actually a practice.
yeah.
And I think what we often kind of nudge up against when we're talking about self-compassion and kindness and these kind of critical ideas is, what I find is we nudge up against our tendencies to then uh, get dichotomous about it and to get perfectionistic about it. So, when I notice that I'm being self-critical, for example, if perfectionism is riding shotgun, I'm in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
because then the critic decides to criticize my inability to be self-compassionate in an important moment, you know? So
Right.
so we need to
Yeah.
stay kind of attentive, and it's not an attentiveness that's like, oh my God, I have to always be on high alert, because that's not going to help. But it's more this sense of awareness that our tendencies, and I love Brene Brown's 3 Ps, so pleasing, perfecting, performing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so common. I relate to that myself. Um, so I'm always like, okay, who's here? Who do I
Yeah.
need to say hello to? Who do I need to say hello to right now? Because when I'm feeling overwhelmed, or when the chips are down, those three, they're there ready to say hello. They're not even saying hello. They're totally ruling. They're
They're
totally
role
ruling.
basing.
They're ruling the roost. And so for me to take charge again, that takes a bit of work.
Yeah.
But like you say, the more we can cultivate this open-hearted awareness. And the other thing I wanted to add here is this open-hearted awareness, it can have this very, I think this is a little bit misunderstood. It kindness is not always like speaking softly and da 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 da. Kindness actually, for many people, has a very like fierce, determined, edge to it that is like that feels a lot more genuine. So
Hmm.
I just wanted to add that because I think some people feel that the brand of kindness that sometimes is out there, or how they define kindness, how it sounds, how it feels, is just so foreign. Whereas that kind of fierce kindness that I know that you kind of espouse, as do I, is that real sense of I've got my back. I've got
Yeah.
my own back. I like when and I've got I know like I know how to turn towards myself when the chips are down type thing. Um yeah, because I think that can be a bit like, well, unless it's this kind of kindness, then I'm not doing it at all type thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And people can feel like they're doing it wrong and
Correct.
head down that path as well. And so really like there isn't, yeah, figuring out what it feels like for you, right? And putting things into motion that elicit that feeling, however that looks.
Exactly. Exactly. And it may have like a gentle, softness to it, or it may have like a fierce, determined, like a lot of my self-kindness mantras, I suppose you would say, the things that the words that come to me straight away, they're not, I wouldn't describe them as soft and gentle. Um,
Are they for fuck's sakes? Because I think that's one of mine.
yes, that's one of mine. How did you know, Dana? How did you know? Fuck this. Oh my God. So it's just, yeah, I think, you know, yeah, so, I don't know, we both agree on this that it doesn't have to, kindness doesn't come in one flavor.
Hmm.
It comes in so many flavors. And it comes, the main thing is, what do you, what resonates with you?
Yeah.
How does it feel when you're being kind? How do you know when kindness is here? How do you know, like, what shifts are you sensing? Um, and that is what's important, not necessarily the words, the perfect words,
Yeah.
um, or the perfect actions. It's like, how do I feel? How do I notice when I'm turning towards myself with kindness rather than criticism? And
Yeah.
that's what we're going for.
Yes. And also, I I want to kind of widen that a little bit. I'm not, well, maybe we'll see where this goes, but I feel like there's I don't know, like no, I'm gonna cancel that because it's not gonna come out and make sense. So it might come out later and we can come back to it. But
That's all right.
yeah, again, really what you said, like how does it resonate with you and what is it that brings about those feelings? And then, what's the motivation? I find sometimes, that's kind of my little nudge. It's like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this out of fear? Am I doing this out of, is it one of the three P's?
Mm.
Or is it out of kindness? Is it out of compassion? Is it out of love? Um, and I think that when it comes to how we eat and what we eat as well, right? When we're looking at the non-diet approach and intuitive eating, this really ties in because it's it's really about, for me, what is the motivation behind your choices? Is it
Mhm.
something that you're doing to because you're critical of yourself? Is it something that you're doing to work on yourself? Is it something that you're doing to yourself?
Mhm.
Or is it something that you're doing in relationship that's going to be supportive and kind, and really elicit that feeling, right, of and well-being and whatever that looks like and feels like
Mhm.
for each
That's
person.
exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right. And yeah, no, you're right. It's the motivations to care for oneself, rather than to manipulate or to change or to control, or yeah, it's a being with rather than a doing to. I guess if we're just to simplify it.
Yes, totally. Thank you. I think that's where I was struggling and trying to get at. And I know I've heard Dana Sturtevant say many times from motivational interviewing and all that sort of stuff is that, you're working for and with, not to and on.
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
And often when we're
Yeah.
working from that to and on place, it's from, the head down, that and those three P's are all there. And then when we're for and with, for me, it tends to be body centered and body up.
Yeah. So I think if we can have, those quick litmus tests,
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful, you
Yeah.
know, just those quick things that we can bring to mind, because what we don't want to do is reenact diet culture and start to get perfectionistic about not dieting anymore. Do you know? Like, it's
Yes.
such a, can get messy.
Absolutely. Or, when we pick up intuitive eating, it very quickly that perfectionistic piece of us again makes it into a plan and makes rules around it. And,
Mhm.
it's super rigid. And then we don't leave any space or room for that flexibility.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I know for myself, I definitely swapped an eating disorder for the other without even really recognizing that that's what I was doing.
Hmm.
And so I have definitely gone down that road a time or two as well with intuitive eating.
Hmm.
And I catch myself. I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
hello, perfection.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because that sense of not knowing is pretty uncomfortable for us. Not knowing, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? And again, loops us back to this tendency we have to want to be to feel comfortable in the dichotomies. If it's
Yes.
not this, it's this. Whereas, the nuance and the complexity that is inherent in feeding ourselves and in tuning into innate signals can feel very nebulous to people. I don't think it is nebulous, but it can feel that way
Mhm.
because we constantly keep defaulting back to the dichotomous, because that's where we feel
Yes.
comfortable. We feel there's this perception of surety or control, or whereas for most people it's the opposite. It's, when it's coming from a place of fear or scarcity, then
Mhm.
it's the fear of loss of control. And if I don't know, then what the hell am I doing then? Well, if we don't know, then isn't that a lovely place to start? Like, what a great place to start being curious, really. But we
Absolutely.
don't always allow ourselves the space to do that.
Yeah, especially again, I know I keep coming back to the perfectionist piece, but I know with so many folks that I speak with, that tends to be the one that ends up in the driver's seat, for a lot of female identifying folks, and it really is, it's not our friend as much as it's there and it's with us so
Mhm.
often, and we think that it's part of ourselves. Um, there is the option and the ability to, also place that beside us. And that's kind of an exercise that I've liked to do from time to time as well, is think about, these feelings or these sensations as a person who would be sitting beside me, and I take them
Mhm.
out of my body and kind of give them their own little persona, so
Mhm.
that, okay, if you're over here, then what's left in here, and what is it that I need in order to cope with this persona or this thing
Mm-hmm.
that's now sitting beside me. So it helps to kind of tease out those pieces a little bit.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that idea. I think that's great. And then like you say, it brings you in relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, so time has flown by.
Unsurprisingly.
I know we're at 8:13 already, so I just want to be mindful of our 45 minutes.
Mhm.
So before we close, is there anything else that you would like to share, that you'd like to add on?
I mean, the maybe the only thing is that just looping back to what we said before is that patience and persistence is really part of this process. This is not a quick fix. You know, finding a sense of body peace, food peace, and a sense of settledness, I guess, within ourselves in a culture that does not want us to settle is an ongoing process. And it can sometimes feel a little bit individualistic in the sense that,
Mm,
you know, oh God, why is it that we always have to change? And I just want to really identify that, you know, privilege and oppression and marginalization, it is real. Fat phobia is real. Stigmatization is real. And that if you are feeling like you're living in the world and, you know, it's you that has to change, not the world, then I want to say that that is not fair and it's not right. And I want to let you know that there are people, all kinds of people in the world that are really, really trying, from research to clinicians to teachers to community oriented folks, like so many people who are really working on a cultural level to really help shift these narratives which are so harmful for us as individuals. So I'm so sorry that, you know, for those of us individually that are doing the work, or those of you who are listening and watching and are feeling like, great, it's still me that has to kind of change my mind. What about the world? Um, that I just want to say I'm sorry that that is the case, and it's not fair, it's not right, and that you know, we're working on it. We're working on it. But what you feel is real.
absolutely. Thank you
Mm.
so much for mentioning that
Mm.
and sharing it in this conversation, because it is
Mm.
super important. And it popped into my mind probably about 15, 20 minutes ago. And I was
Right.
like, okay, how am I going to work this in? Where is this going to go?
Right.
Because you don't need to change. And
Right.
just did it absolutely so beautifully and eloquently as you do. So
Well, thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun. It just feels like we're
yeah,
just chatting as usual. We do, you know, it's great.
that's how I like it. And so, for those of you listening, thank you so much. For those of you who are going to check out the replay, feel free to post any questions in the chat as well. I'll be checking in and seeing what's there. If you'd like more information on Fiona, I will also post that. Something that I did forget to mention in the beginning is that Fiona has a wicked podcast, Mindful
Mhm.
Dietitian. So you can also check that out on Apple iTunes.
Mhm.
And her website, themindfuldietitian.com.au. She's
Mhm.
also your half of the Body Positive Australia. It's yourself
That's
and
right.
Sarah.
That's right. Yep. Myself and
Yeah.
Sarah. Yep.
And she's also now taken the show on the road and
Yep.
venturing to North America every once in a while for clinician and practitioner trainings, which I had the absolute pleasure of sitting in on with her and Marcy Evans, the body image for clinicians training, which was great. So stay tuned for I think your roster might already be out for 2019.
Yeah, almost. We're getting so
Hello?
close. Yeah, we're getting so close. And so we are coming back to North America. Well, we being me. So
Bring in the spirit though of everyone
that's right.
else. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so you can check that out as well on our website, join our mailing list. Thank you so much for being here, Fee. It's been such a pleasure. And if you want,
So much fun, Dana. Thank you.
you're very welcome. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Myself, flying solo, I'll be sharing a little bit more about self-compassion and kindness and looking to yourself with curiosity over the holidays, which can be a shit show. So we're going to chat a little bit about that at noon next Wednesday. Thanks. Take care, everyone. Bye.